Well, good afternoon. Good afternoon and welcome to another of our Webinar Wednesdays. Webinar Wednesday, it's been a fixture at the CSU Bakersfield Small Business Development Center since 2013. The past 90 weeks, we have spent managing your small business either during, through, or now hopefully beyond the pandemic. So number 90, been here every Wednesday live. Got a great guest today. Guy's been here before, Richard Gearhart, Dr. Richard Gearhart. I'm going to talk about our economy. So let's talk about what's going on today. Well, something I really didn't want to talk about, but now seems to move right to the very top of what you talk about on December 1st, 2021, and that is our business recovery being threatened by the Omicron variant. And news this morning of actually the first test that has been COVID test that has confirmed that Omicron is in the United States. And of course, it's in California. Apparently, it has been here since this individual returned back from South Africa on November 22nd. So what does that mean if you're a small business owner? Again, we're not talking so much about the pandemic and the pandemic aspects. We're talking about managing your business through this and beyond this pandemic. It brings out a great deal of uncertainty is what it does. It brings, the threat of and more risk of slowdowns that we've seen much of the past 20 months. So it is kind of in the news and all over it, and something we will be watching, and hopefully we will have maybe a lesser impact than is at least projected or maybe forecast. We got a lot going on in this economy, the general economy, and we're going to get into that a little bit later, get into that in much detail, because there is a lot going on, a lot of moving parts, a lot of different changes that are happening in our economic front, and we will bring in our expert for that. Also, with December 1st here, we're entering the EIDL program, the Economic Injury Disaster Loan. This program, the COVID EIDL, is entering its last month as the program is set to expire on 12/31/2021. So really your last chance to jump in on any of the three EIDL products that still remain. The COVID EIDL, which is the disaster loan that we'll talk a little bit about as we typically do on Webinar Wednesday. But we'll also mention, the targeted and supplemental EIDLs that really have not had a lot of as much publicity as the COVID EIDL program. We did get a couple of local programs extended. One of them, the local City of Bakersfield Restart to Grant program. We'll talk a little bit about that in a few moments. Also, the California revenues, that would be nice, but it's just venues, stop short of the RE. The California Venues Grant Program was extended also until the 7th, next Tuesday. And we'll talk a little bit about that, give you an update on other programs, your question, and also a brief poll today. So just a single one little biggest concern is what we're going to look for. And so what is your biggest concern facing the economy? So let's launch that particular poll. You got a lot of different choices. You've got evolving labor markets, inflation, government spending, COVID affecting economic recovery, or maybe it's another concern that you have because there are plenty more. The government's ending stimulus for small business, etc. If you have an other, please go to the chat box and put it in there and we'll review that in the chat box. So again, your biggest concern about the economy. And is it the labor market and finding employees and the evolution that's happening there? Inflation has obviously been a big issue, tied to a lot of different factors. Government spending, there's been a lot that has been spent on pandemic relief for small businesses, of which we are grateful. But, obviously, with today's news, COVID affecting the economic recovery could be a selection for you, and also other. And we have a few others, so you can go to the chat box and put in any other concerns that you have about the U.S. economy. Okay, we have about 78% of you participated. So that's a great number. So I think what we're going to do is end the poll and share the results as we go over 80%. Love going over 80% for the poll. We're going to end it and share the results. And with 82% of you, the biggest concern now is COVID affecting the economic recovery. And really, that is, I think, being driven by the uncertainty about this variant and what it can and will do. Also, 37% of you, inflation. Inflation, a big issue, and a big issue because of many factors that we'll get into, nonetheless, supply chain issues and things like that. Also, we have 11% of you about the evolving labor markets and a lot of the changes that the workforce in the US is actually going through, changing jobs, looking at self-employment and other things. So 11% of you there, 11% of you also are in the other, and we will hit the chat box and check to see what's there. And 5% of you, not too many, concerned about the amount of government spending that has gone on pandemic-wise and otherwise. So thank you all for participating. We will stop that and actually move on now. Okay, so another thing, just a little bit of advice or a little bit of a warning for you. You know, at the SBDC, we do not charge for any of our one-on-one consulting. It's all free. Our 90 webinars and close to 200 webinars that we've done since 2013 have been almost exclusively free. And but what we do is we like to charge you a different way. We like to charge you with your expertise and your advice. And so we have a survey coming tomorrow that's going to be sent out by email. And it's a very brief, but we would really appreciate your interest and your really where your interest is on seeing where Webinar Wednesday goes and the topics that you would like to see presented. So here's a number of the topics that are going to be on that. So the survey's coming tomorrow. Please participate. So also, our regularly status that we like to give and we like to provide on the pandemic relief programs that are still available. One time I believe we had a dozen or more that we were actually looking at on a weekly basis. The EIDL loan program is still open. There's a number of ways that you can apply. You can request reconsideration if you were formerly denied within the past 6 months. You can also get an increase if you already have an EIDL loan. And EIDL, you know, it ends 12/31. There's not a lot of discussion about any other small business pandemic relief programs. I think there's demonstrated by our poll question, a huge amount of uncertainty about where this new variant is going to take us. And really, if you can and you feel compelled, you know, the EIDL is really something you need to consider in this last month if you really are not sure of where this thing is headed. We also have been talking a lot about the Employee Retention Credit, the ERC, which was open and has ended as of September 30th. It has been a fairly lucrative program for a lot of small and medium-sized businesses that we've talked to. And there are ways of managing that to where you can maximize your employee retention credit benefit. I will give you a list of webinars that we have had and hosted that are on our YouTube page, and you can review some of these key topics that were discussed for the entire hour. As I mentioned, the California Venues Grant Program was extended. The extension came and till 12/7. We have in the chat at the very top, well, at the very top is the, if you wanted to share the webinar link with anybody else, but the second item in the chat box was that particular grant program resource guide. So a lot of information there, 40+ pages. This is one that you actually go through Lindustry to apply for, and it remains open. The City of Bakersfield Restart Loan to Grant Program. That is the City of Bakersfield Restart Loan to Grant Program. We have with us a special guest that I would like to introduce. Pamela Mostert is with us from Access Plus Capital, where she serves as the Business Services Manager. Pamela is here to share with us some details on what is happening with the City of Bakersfield Restart Loan to Grant Program. Pamela is not related to Raheem Mostert, who is a running back with our 49ers, but possibly is related to Richard T. Mostert. Pamela, please take it away and give us an update on the City of Bakersfield Restart Loan to Grant Program.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Kelly, for allowing me the opportunity to talk about this great program that we have the pleasure of administering on behalf of the City of Bakersfield. So just a little bit about Access Plus Capital. We are a CDFI, a Certified Development Financial Institution, which is a nonprofit lender, so different than a traditional commercial lender. We also provide much needed technical assistance training to small businesses in addition to the lending. And we are located in 14 counties in California. But today I want to talk about the City of Bakersfield grant program. We are running two programs. The first is the grant program, so free money, right? But this is really meant for micro enterprise businesses. So if you're self-employed, similar to a beautician, barber, something of that nature where you don't have any employees, this program is for you. So the business just needs to be started in 2019 and demonstrate a loss due to COVID-19. If you have up to 5 employees, so 2 to 5 employees, you are eligible for $5,000. If you're self-employed, you're eligible for $3,500. We still have plenty of funds available. The process is rather simple. You can go to our website, which will be on an additional slide, apply, and we do have assistance to help you through the program. The other program is the loan to grant. Now, this is for larger businesses. So as long as you're located in the city limits of Bakersfield, you have revenues less than $2 million, and you have less than 25 employees, you may apply for this program. Now, the amount is based on the number of employees. So it's $2,500 per employee. So if your business has 10 employees, that would be you're eligible for $25,000. Now, it is a loan for the first 12 months based on 3% interest with interest-only payments. Now, the end of 12 months, as long as you were able to retain the number of employees that you started the program with, it will be forgiven. So it will turn into a grant. Now, you don't have to have the same employees. So if you started and applied with 10 employees, you just have to have 10 employees at the end of 12 months to be eligible for the grant. And this can be used for a number of items, including working capital. Now, we do have an office located in Bakersfield, but we do have staff available specifically to help with this program on Wednesdays and Fridays from 10 to 4. We're going to be located at the Friendship House Community Center, which is at 2424 Cottonwood Road. And we can assist with just starting the application. We can help with applications that are already in progress. We can help you upload documents, complete documents, also help you get your SAMS and DUNS number, which is a requirement for both programs. So you can go to our website to apply, which is accesspluscapital.com. And you can go to calendly.com/accesspluscapital to actually schedule an appointment. But I will be there on Fridays, and we have additional staff on Wednesdays and Fridays as well. So with that, Kelly, do we want to take any questions regarding just this specific program?
Well, what we'll do is we'll take questions. If you have a question, you can put it in the Q&A box, and we'll look at it at the end, and then we can forward those to you, Pam.
Perfect. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and I appreciate we're able to spread the word on this wonderful program.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. And, you know, as I'm sitting here right now to look at City Hall in the city of Bakersfield, that's all I have to do. And there it is. So
Nice.
great program. So please take advantage. There's technical assistance available through the SBDC and the Women's Business Center. So it's an opportunity. And as we're running out of opportunities, that is great. So thanks again.
Thank you.
Okay, so some of the other programs, the California Relief Grant Program has closed. There's going to be a new program coming out late in January, and that might really dovetail nicely if you did not receive the California grant with the small micro grant program through the city of Bakersfield, where you could actually get money from both sources. The EIDL targeted advance and supplemental advance are both open. We'll give more details on that maybe next week as we wind down for conclusion of that program, and PPP forgiveness is still open. So on the EIDL program, again, there's reconsideration that's available if you were turned down. There is the email. What you're going to want to do is find out why we're declined, and also try to fix that reason why it was declined and not reapply, but actually seek reconsideration. If you'd like additional funds, you already have an EIDL loan. You can actually either go into your portal, and there's the website for the portal. You can email SBA at COVID EIDL increase request at sba.gov and try to get additional funds. We talked about the California Venues Grant Program. Again, that has been extended. It's been extended twice now. So there are monies available, and really, it really caught me by surprise, because this was one that I thought, being $150 million aggregate loan or grant program, that the funds would be extended by now or extinguished by now, but they're still available apparently because we've had 2 extensions. If PPP forgiveness is still on your horizon, there are 3 forms, and you can see there the best way of doing it. The timeline again for PPP forgiveness is 24 weeks to use. If you elect a covered period of 24 weeks, you have 10 months, a 10-month window from the end of your covered period apply for PPP forgiveness. If you miss that, you will start accruing payments. You will get an invoice from your lender saying you need to start thinking about this. It's not 10 months and then you can no longer apply for forgiveness. It just starts the payment process. So that is really one key point, that if you have payments, contact the SBDC if you're receiving payments for PPP and you think that you should have items that are forgiven. So many of our past, we mentioned, this is number 90. If you want to go to an expert topic, so if you want to see an expert topic on the webinar, you're going to want to view the Keith Bryce webinar from September. The employee retention credit from October 27th with Michael Stevenson. A lot of the COVID issues, John McFarland, very helpful. Employees through America's Job Center, our guest was Teresa Hitchcock. And also PPP forgiveness back on June 9th. So if you want more detail in a quick period, go to our YouTube channel, CSUB SBDC YouTube, and you can find those all there. Okay, it's great to introduce our guest speaker today with so much going on in the economy, so much that we could talk about. Our guest today, special guest, of course, is Richard A. Gearhart. And Richard is an associate professor of economics for CSUB School of Business and Public Administration. Been there since 2014, receiving his doctorate and master's degree from Clemson University, where he is a big Clemson football fan. Don't get me wrong. Even this year, I'm sure. So he has taught standalone econ classes as a graduate assistant for 3 years while at Clemson University. A member of the CSUB Academic Senate, frequent presenter on local Kern County economic trends, published several scholastic papers, lives in Bakersfield with really the star of his family, his wife, and his 2 young daughters. Richard, it's great to have you back. Great to have you here again. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure to come as usual. I think Kelly was right. I am not the star of the family. I'm actually, I think, the least liked member of the family, which I know is hard to believe. It's shocking, but what can you do? So what I want to do today is I want to pick out some national trends and national pieces of interest of things that we're seeing. We're now entering close to 2 years of the pandemic, and Omicron is upon us. And it's been a wild ride. It's been a ride where we don't really know what's happening. And we've seen central governments, we've seen central banks enact policies that we haven't seen in generations, if ever. And unfortunately, as the economy grows more complex, as the economy gets more globalized, the answers to any one of our questions, why is inflation happening? Why are wages rising? Where are the workers? There's no single answer, which adds a little bit of flavor to the analysis. It adds a little bit of fun, but also makes it just really hard to plan and really hard to forecast. So what I want to do today is I picked out several trends that I think are important that we should talk about. So let me share my screen. There we go. So the first question, biggest question, where have the workers gone? And so, we see articles in the paper all the time about businesses can't find workers. So where have all the workers gone? And so here is labor force participation. And labor force participation is essentially the fraction of the population that's either employed or looking for work. And we're down about 5.6 million total workers pre-pandemic. So if you look, that big gray area is essentially when COVID hit, and we just see a massive drop in the fraction of Americans who are either working or who want to work. And so that's 5.6 million workers. That's massive. That's one of the single largest drops we've ever seen. And so where are they? Well, a simple explanation would be COVID deaths. We've lost about 770,000 Americans over the course of the about 20 months of the pandemic, which is incredibly unfortunate. Most of the deaths have been in older age groups, 65 and up, with a very large concentration in Americans who are over the age of 85. We've lost about 300,000 workers due to COVID death, which is, sizable. It's not an insubstantial chunk of workers who are no longer working in the workplace. Well, if we look, here is the labor force participation rate for individuals over the age of 65 with no disability. So those are typically the ones who are willing and able to work. You can look at labor force participation for disabled seniors, but the labor force participation rate there is about 5%. So it's not a big driver of labor market trends. So before the pandemic, about 1 in 4 people over the age of 65 was either still working or wanted to work. And that was going to cause issues in the future. In part, they're working longer because they haven't saved up for private retirement. They don't know, that they want to keep their current health insurance. So that wasn't great. But if we've seen it, we've lost about 1.2 million workers due to retirement from COVID. So that's both good and bad. We need to get people close to retirement age out of the labor force to make sure that younger workers are able to enter and start building their experience, start building their wages, start building their earnings capacity. So it's kind of good to make sure that, retirees are kind of cycling out of the labor force. It's unfortunately bad because a lot of retirees are not in a position to be able to retire comfortably. A lot of retirees have very little private savings and will rely mainly on Medicare, not Medicare, Social Security, which isn't an incredibly generous program by its nature. So we have lost about 1.2 million workers out of those 5.6 million who've retired. Oops. Okay, well, what about near retirements? Those might be people age 55 to 64 who maybe want to start their own business, or who maybe have enough of a nest egg saved up, or who are just tired of work. And so this is the labor force participation rate for people over the age of 55. And it had been an upward trend, a steadily upward trend since the beginning of the 1990s. Again, that's both good and bad. We want to make sure we have these experienced people in the labor market. But if they're in the labor market, it probably suggests that they don't have the nest egg to be able to retire. Well, near retirements, we've seen about 1 million fewer workers age 55 to 64 drop out of the labor force and retire early. Now, a lot of that is people are retiring because they're getting generous compensation packages to leave, sometimes 1 to 2 years worth of salary and benefits. So we might see this number tick up a little bit in the future. But again, a lot of businesses, if given the choice between hiring and training a worker in their 30s versus hiring and training a worker in their 50s, will probably choose the younger worker. It's just a better return on investment. So again, near retirements explain about 1 million fewer workers that we've seen. Well, the really kind of key part of the labor force is what we call the prime age labor force. And the prime age labor force are workers between the age of 25 to 54. They're workers who need to work because they have families, or workers who need to work because they're nearing the end of their work cycle and are saving for retirement. We consider those kind of the biggest part of the labor pool. And so if we look, we've lost about 1.2 million prime age workers. So there are 1.2 million fewer 25 to 54-year-olds in the labor market. Well, that's problematic. Those are the key workers that drive an economy. So where are they? Well, it's unlikely that they're returning to education en masse or acquiring human capital. We would expect that for the 16 to 24 age group. So where are these workers? These are the workers that we need in leisure and hospitality, construction, manufacturing, business services. These are the ones who are going to grow your business. So where are they? So where are the prime age workers? COVID deaths. About 60,000 of these prime age workers of the 1.2 million have died from COVID, which again is unfortunate. It's mainly due to the Delta variant, where most of these deaths have occurred. But so COVID has eliminated about 60,000. One of the biggest single reasons we are seeing this massive decline in the number of prime age workers are childcare constraints. So they've left the labor market. And if you look at traditional gender norms, those tend to be females who are leaving the labor market. So if you think about it, for childcare is expensive. The median cost of childcare in this country for one child is about $12,000 a year. Two children, it's about $20,000 a year for just private childcare. And unfortunately, what happens is a lot of private childcare is in private homes rather than in kind of daycare facilities. Well, COVID has ravaged these private homes. A lot of private individuals who did open up these daycares in their own homes tended to be older. And there were significant issues with them being older, being exposed to the virus. So they've largely shut down. They've gone the way of the dodo. Well, if there's uncertainty about where your child is going to remain, and since a lot of workers do have labor market inflexibility, they can't just take time off when their kid is sick. They can't take, hours off out of the day to take their child to the doctor or take their child to school. Well, the option is a lot of them are dropping out of the labor force. Again, that's unfortunate. And if that's a main driver of labor market leaves, which is kind of what the data suggests, that's going to have a lot of issues. You know, we've seen tremendous labor market gains from females over the past 60 years that have largely been eroded in 2 years of COVID. Well, you know, part of the reason is a large number of workers who have left the leisure and hospitality sectors. Well, these tend to be what most people, especially workers, hourly workers, would consider unpleasant working conditions. It's long hours and flexible hours, low pay, low benefits, dealing with unpleasant consumers. So a lot of workers have simply left the labor force because they're not getting paid enough. They're not getting enough benefits to make it worthwhile to stay in the jobs. Virus uncertainty still matters. With relatively low worldwide and US vaccination rates, we don't know what the consequences will be of virus mutations. And unfortunately, that's kind of a key of what respiratory viruses do. They mutate. Some of these workers have actually moved to independent contractor style work. So they're food delivery services, they're Uber. They're not necessarily captured in the formal statistics, but they do matter and it is happening. Some of the workers are becoming self-employed. They'd rather become their own businesses, which is great. But again, when they're doing it in large numbers, it's a little bit worrisome for businesses who are looking for employees. And yes, there are some workers who have stayed home because they have enhanced benefits. You know, they have the money, they don't need it. So there's a lot of reasons why, and this is unfortunate. It's unfortunate because there's no easy solution. There's no easy solution to getting workers back. It's not just going to be paying higher wages. It's not going to be increasing the minimum wage. There's a number of reasons why, and that's problematic. And historically, about 1 in 20 workers works multiple jobs. So this graph is multiple job holders as a percent of the employed. And we're at a new low. We're currently at 4.6%, which doesn't sound like a massive decline from the historical average of 5%. But, you know, multiple job holders typically don't want to work multiple jobs. Multiple job holders typically work multiple jobs because that's what they need to do to support their economic lifestyle. Well, that kind of cratered during the COVID pandemic. And though reducing the number of multiple job holders is good during an economic boom, during an economic recession, it does suggest that the labor market is tight, no one is hiring, which we know is not the case right now, or that there are liquidity constraints for households. And what we call liquidity constraints are childcare, food, not having enough money. And that makes more sense to take care of the kids at home. So again, coupled with this prime age decline in the labor force, you're seeing a lot of families who are making economic calculations for one member of the household to drop out or reduce their hours to take care of their families. And again, it's incredibly problematic. It's not an easy solution. All right, so that's the labor market. So where are the workers? Well, let's look at wages. You know, wage growth and what we're seeing with wages is always a very big question. Everyone always wants more wages, higher wages, those sorts of things. And sometimes it can happen, sometimes it's not. So here is data from the Atlanta Fed. So the Atlanta Fed has data on wages, which is incredibly cool. So here we have wage growth by full-time and part-time workers. And so on average, full-time workers earn about 3.7% more annually. That's typically their raise. That's historically been the raises they've been getting since the 1990s. On average, part-time workers earn about 2.8% more annually. Well, it's kind of flipped during the COVID pandemic, especially now. Recently, when we have these tight labor markets, employers are desperate for workers. And what are they doing? They're increasing the wages that they are willing to pay kind of these non-traditional workers, the part-time workers, maybe the teens, maybe a second income earner, maybe someone taking on a second job. And in September and October of 2021, annual wage growth was the same for part-time and full-time workers, which is astonishing. If you look at that orange graph, historically, it's pretty much always below wage increases for full-time workers. And usually that's when part-time wages are higher than full-time wages. It's because there are no full-time workers available. That's usually because in an economic boom, they're all hired. Well, now a lot of the full-time workers have left the labor force. So we're left kind of picking up the pieces from part-time workers. Well, one of the reasons why it might be hard to find a job is if you kind of take a glance at people who are job stayers, and a job stayer is someone who remains in their job, and job switchers, a job switcher is someone who leaves their job typically for better pay and benefits. Well, what have we seen? We've kind of seen these upticks in how much businesses are willing to pay people who are willing to switch to their jobs. That is levels that we haven't seen since before the Great Recession in 2007 to 2009. So on average, job stayers earn 3.3% wage growth. Job leavers about 4.0%. In September and October of 2021, job stayers earned 3.2% increases in their wages. Job leavers, 4.3%. Or again, businesses are struggling for workers. And what they're doing is they're having to poach workers from other places of employment with the promise of better pay and better benefits. Again, during an economic boom, when there are no workers because they're all employed, that's a good thing. Now, it's not necessarily a good thing because we don't have workers because they're all employed. We don't have workers because they've all left the labor force because they can't find people to take care of their children, people to take care of their families. They don't find the inflexibility of work to be desirable anymore. So there's the chance of a fundamental change in the labor market. Inflation. So, we're all talking about inflation. And again, unfortunately, inflation is a multifaceted phenomenon. If you look, we've seen massive amounts of money injected into the economy since 2020. We've actually seen massive amounts of money injected in the economy since 2007. If you look at money growth, it's massive. And it spans both Democrat and it spans both Republican administrations. Okay, so more money, more inflation. Supply chain bottlenecks could lead to inflation. During this time, we've seen certain states raise their minimum wages. Minimum wage increases could be proximate causes of inflation. Well, here is wage growth by industry. So broken it down: construction and mining, education and health, finance, insurance and real estate, leisure and hospitality, manufacturing, public administration, trade and transportation. You see the industries that are typically the hardest hit right now, which is leisure and hospitality, has on average the lowest level of wage increases, which is why you're seeing a lot of dissatisfaction. And so the only sector really during the COVID-19 pandemic that has seen massive wage increases to try to entice workers is leisure and hospitality. Right now, they're averaging about 4% annual wage increases. Again, before COVID, it was 2.8%. So they're trying to entice workers. But if you look, leisure and hospitality is a fraction of US GDP. Leisure and hospitality only accounts for about 3% of US GDP. It's not the biggest sector. So this kind of pushes back on the notion that inflation is kind of this wage push inflation, where higher wages lead to higher prices, which lead to higher wages, which lead to higher prices. It might be localized inflation, but on a national level, we're not seeing the inflation we're seeing just because workers are demanding higher pay. Why? Well, here is the different industries, how much of GDP they account for, and what percent. And so the wage growth in leisure and hospitality, which is higher than average, so that would be the one contributing to the inflation, it's a small fraction of US GDP. So it's unlikely to be the prime determinant in inflation. Again, that's problematic. We're in a globalized economy, and COVID is hitting different parts of the world at different times. And one of the benefits of a globalized economy, which is lower prices for consumers, is now coming home to roost with supply chain issues. We're already talking about UPS and FedEx in October sent out notifications to consumers. If you want your goods in time for Christmas, start shipping sooner rather than later. Here's wage growth by wage level. So first quartile, second quartile, third quartile, and fourth quartile. So first quartile wages are workers who earn less than $17 an hour. Those are the ones I want to focus on. First quartile wages have grown at 4.8% in August, 4.9% in September, 5.1% in October. Again, those typically average 2.8, 3.1%. So we're seeing massive increases again in trying to entice hourly workers to come back into the labor force. And that's exhibiting itself in higher wages. And so it's problematic. We again have a lot of labor market issues where typically wage increases are again a way of getting people who don't want to be in the labor force to get back into the labor force. Well, it's not during COVID that people don't want to be in the labor force, it's that they can't get back into the labor force because they have other constraints. So again, it's a fundamental difference in what we've been seeing in the economy. I'm running out of time, so I'm not worried about that one. And female wage growth. So look at female wage growth, which has ticked up during the past few months, which is exceeding male wage growth. Why is that important? Well, it does suggest that those exiting the labor market tend to be females. Again, it's likely for household production reasons. It's likely because of traditional gender norms. And so it does suggest that to entice females back into the labor force, we must offer them higher wages. But again, higher wages aren't leading to people flocking back into the economy. The prime age labor force is still pretty low. And the biggest reason is, again, the uncertainty that we're seeing with COVID and the uncertainty that we're seeing with what people are going to do with their families. By education. So the workers who have seen the largest wage increases during the COVID-19 pandemic have been those with a high school degree or less, so high school educated or high school dropouts. Individuals who hold bachelor's degrees or associate's degrees are actually getting paid less. They're seeing lower wage growth compared to their average. Part of that is, work from home, where there are some cost savings from not having to travel into work, both in terms of time, gas, wear and tear on the car, those sorts of things. But again, traditionally, we would view this massive increase in wages for high school graduates or high school dropouts as a good thing. Part of the reason we've had issues in the labor market, part of the reasons why we've had inequality in the labor market is because high school graduates and high school dropouts have been falling behind in the labor market, especially in a globalized labor market. So normally we look at this and say, hey, listen, we're closing the gap. But again, we're not closing the gap. People aren't getting back into the labor force. We're just struggling to find any workers. And the way to find any workers is to slowly increase the wage to entice people back into the labor market. This again ties to the struggles we're seeing largely in leisure and hospitality. All industries are suffering, but leisure and hospitality, compared to pre-pandemic, is the sector that has been hit hardest. Business close downs, people feeling uncomfortable, and workers. It's kind of the ultimate trifecta. So, what's the state of the economy? Are things good? Are things bad? So real consumption expenditures, that's basically how much people are spending, have increased by 4.2% since February of 2020. So actually, we've kind of eliminated all of these spending losses that we've seen. We're back on trend, which is astonishing when you think about what COVID has done to both people and the economy. We're actually back to spending levels that we would have expected if COVID wasn't here. Well, this kind of hides some broader trends because, again, we know that the recovery is kind of looking K-shaped, and a K-shaped economic recovery is one in which high-income individuals, middle-income individuals have been doing okay, if not great. Lower-income individuals, on the other hand, even with the fiscal stimuli, even with enhanced unemployment benefits, it's a part-time increase in their income. They're not doing that great. So let's look at the composition. So here is personal consumption expenditures to income. So we want to compare how much we're spending based on our income. And so if you look historically, we hover around 80%, or the average American family spends 80% of their income. Well, what did we see during the pandemic? Kind of that right-hand side of the figure. Oh, we saw massive decreases. We saw consumption relative to income get hit. We saw income get hit. And so this is, but it's recovering. And that's a little counterintuitive, and it's left a lot of economists wondering why. Well, what this might suggest is it might be indicative of an economy financed by debt. So we want to look at debt levels in the United States. So the blue line is total debt. The green line is revolving debt. That's credit cards, home equity lines of credit, and personal lines of credit. No, sorry, the red line is non-revolving debt. Non-revolving debt are mortgages, auto loans, and student loans. The green line is the revolving debt, the credit cards. So let's look at the green line first. And this is relative to income. So we see that we've actually seen some decreases in the fraction of income that we spend that's driven by credit cards. So this is both good and bad. Why is it good? It's good in that we don't want people getting into massive amounts of credit card debt. Credit card debt is not necessarily the best kind of debt, especially for lower income individuals who are often credit constrained. This could be bad because a lot of times people need credit cards to be able to buy large purchases, fridges, Christmas gifts, vacations, those sorts of things. So if we're seeing these declines in kind of revolving debt, maybe it's people not getting credit cards, not being able to spend it. So that's problematic. Well, if we look at the red line, that's non-revolving debt, that's increased dramatically. It's never been this high. And so if you look at it, nearly 40% of the average American's income annually is debt. Again, it's not great. Debt is good. Too much debt, not good. And so if you look, here's total non-revolving debt per auto and home sale. And I've kind of weighted this based on the fact that historically you should spend about 15% of your income on an auto loan. That's the maximum. Mortgage all in is about 28%. So if you see, before the Great Recession, each new home and car that was purchased was associated with about $250,000 worth of non-revolving debt. So if you bought a home and bought a car in the same year, your debt increased by about $250,000. Well, look at what's happened with the Federal Reserve kind of easy money, quantitative easing for consumers since the end of the Great Recession. Right now, for every home or car purchased, we have about $800,000 in debt, and it hasn't fallen during the pandemic. So again, this does kind of speak to the difficulties we're going to face even escaping COVID. We have some structural inequities in our economy. We have inflation that's probably not going to be transitory. And you saw, if you lived during Paul Volcker's time, you saw what Paul Volcker had to do to clamp down on inflation. You know, they might have to tamp down on the good economic times. We see the Federal Reserve, who is likely going to have to tighten, which may not be the best thing, again, during a COVID-19 pandemic. We've seen people leaving the labor force and staying out of the labor force, even with higher wages, which hints that there are constraints on their economic behavior. And we're seeing these constraints on their economic behavior with no significant declines in debt collected for the average household, which suggests that there could be issues with this generation when they want to retire. So all in all, I think one of the biggest issues, I think the biggest issue that we'll face in the next 20 years is the recovery from COVID. So thank you guys for listening. Thank you, Kelly, for having me on. I didn't go completely over my time.
Fascinating, Doctor. Fascinating. I have questions, and but first a comment, because you brought up toward the end about Paul Volcker and inflation back a few decades ago. This is really a millennial's first view of inflation. Is that fair? I mean, not necessarily for you who work in all economic conditions, but really, I think it's just possibly the beginning, but it's really kind of fascinating.
It really is. I mean, if you look, headline inflation has been much less than 2%. And that's been, it's been something that in millennials' working lives, you really haven't had to deal with. You haven't had to worry about tying wages or benefits to cost of living adjustments because the cost of living adjustment was minimal. Now, but the most recent month had inflation at potentially 6.4%, which is astonishingly high relative to the good economic times we've been seeing.
I do have some questions, and if you have questions, go to the Q&A box and insert them, please. A great opportunity to get your questions answered, like I'm about ready to. Last week, and I think these might be fairly easy, at least from a layman like me, to identify what's going on, but last week there was a couple of economic news, and it was unemployment claims were the lowest in many, many, many years. The weekly total, which is done every week, unemployment claims filed. So do you have any comments on that? Is that just a COVID thing, going through COVID, or is that a trend?
So it's both good and bad. It's good we're getting to pre-pandemic times where you would naturally expect not a lot of people to want to be unemployed or to be claiming unemployment. It's bad in that it maybe reflects a couple of trends. It reflects people who have simply left the labor force. Again, those tend to be predominantly females who have left the labor force. They can't collect unemployment if they're not looking for jobs. We do want some unemployment in a naturally functioning economy. We want people searching for jobs. So this decrease may mean that people are worried about, actively searching for other jobs and taking the hit on their wages. So they might just not be searching for it. And it's also reduction in the federal unemployment benefits, where if I'm not getting the extra money, it may not be worth it to actively search for other jobs and collect unemployment.
I read last week that a survey of CEOs were very bullish and optimistic on the economy. I think maybe in the news of the last week has changed that. But one stat that kind of stood out, one economic stat, was that durable goods were lower the last 2 months. And, you know, being the layman that I am, I just kind of attribute that to supply chain shortages and misfunctions. But is there any longer term effect of that?
Yeah, so it absolutely is supply chain. If you think about durable goods purchases, fridges, cars, those sorts of things, a lot of those purchases were made kind of early on in the pandemic. So you kind of saw a spike in durable goods purchases. So I think it's a little bit natural where people just bought a new fridge. I don't need a second new fridge. But I also think there is, you know, some worry because durable goods purchases are an important component of consumer spending because they are large one-time purchases that you make when you feel comfortable. But you often have to make these purchases using credit. And the fact that we're seeing decreases in credit card debt probably suggests that either people aren't too optimistic about the future and being able to repay that, or they don't have access to credit anymore, which that would be kind of the worst case scenario.
Okay, since I don't see any Q&A, any questions there, I'm going to continue my my fun part of my job of playing Stump the Doctor. So here we go. Fed Chairman Powell has been in the news a lot lately. First of all, he was extended to another term by President Biden. And he also yesterday before a House committee came out and said that he was going to end easy money policies for stimulus that most of us don't really see, but it's kind of behind the scenes of making the economy. Any comments on those two items?
You know, so when you get to Jerome Powell's level, one of the biggest lessons is that people don't necessarily act the way that you expect them to, and people act based on expectations. So what I expect to happen. And so a lot of, you know, what macroeconomists suggest is that trying to get people to modify their behavior with public announcements where you can have these short bumps in economic activity based on what I'm saying. It's what Elon Musk has perfected. Elon Musk announces things on Twitter all the time, and you see the value of Tesla go through the roof. And then it actually turns out it's not as good as what he said, and then Tesla stock falls, but he makes a ton of money during it. So I think, you know, it's what I would suggest when looking at what the Fed is doing and looking at what Powell is saying is don't necessarily listen to what the adults are saying, watch what the adults are doing. And so that's the key, is reading the Fed minutes, seeing what they actually do with the federal funds rates and whether they will engage in tightening, and seeing if they maybe if they sort of delegate some of the stimulus to maybe President Biden. That's what I would expect.
Excellent. Okay, you know, stocks and oil have slid recently. Much of it has been on Omicron fears, inflation concerns, and other factors. In the short term, do you see that continuing?
Yes, and especially at least in the next 2 weeks, because the next 2 weeks are kind of key with the new variant for COVID, because we don't know yet. We know it's more contagious. We don't know if it's as deadly, less deadly, or more deadly. We don't know what the symptoms are like. Again, preliminary evidence suggested it was mild, but now we're starting to get some hospital data from South Africa that suggests that it's actually worse for younger people. I read a pretty disturbing stat that 10% of all COVID hospitalizations in South Africa right now are for children less than the age of 2.
Ow.
And that 70% of children under the age of 4 who are being diagnosed with the Omicron variant are going to the hospital. Now, we don't know that hospitalizations lag cases by 2 to 3 weeks, deaths lag by another 2 to 3 weeks. Pediatric specialists in South Africa are going to be announcing their findings next week. So I think that's going to be the big game changer. Is the airlines came out and are kind of worried. They anticipate holiday travel maybe staying the same, but they don't know what's going to happen to business travel, especially with Omicron, and that's where they make a lot of their money. So I think the next kind of 2 to 3 weeks with the data we're going to see out of South Africa will shape what actually happens with this variant.
Well, as they say, I guess stay tuned, huh? And,
Unfortunately.
And, I know healthcare, economics of healthcare and other aspects of healthcare are a vital study for you and kind of research that you have done over the years. So fascinating times, unfortunately.
Yeah, I wish it wasn't as fascinating. I'd take boring over what we've seen.
Yeah, bore me. I agree. Richard, thank you so much for joining us. I can see that just talking on 2 topics on the economy, and there's so much more that we didn't even scratch on the surface, just hitting the primary issues and really where we're going in 2022. Begs to have you and your colleagues back from CSU BPA Economics Department, and maybe we can do something in January. So, hey, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure.
Okay, well, we will be back. We ran a few minutes long, but hey, it's easy to eject out of a webinar. So we'll be back next week with our 91st version of this. And until then, for Richard Gearhart and for Pamela Mostert and our producer, Maureen Busherdang, I'm Kelly Bearden, and we will see you next week. Bye-bye, everybody.